Hi, I'm Ashley Daigle, and this is Advice from the Cheerbrarian. Never heard that word before? That's because I smushed two words together, because I felt like it. This week, we're going to do what we always do mix a dollop of advice to improve your life, born from a few of my successes and a boatload of my mistakes, with the book recommendation of the week, unearthed by my voracious love of reading, from self help to historical fiction and everything in between. Today is my 20th episode, and I am doing a retrospective. We will be sharing the top 5 moments and top 3 recommendations of the first 20 episodes. I am very excited to go down memory lane with you and make an announcement about the future of the pod. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. If you like what you hear, and I really hope you do, please, pretty please, with 2 cherries on top, tell 2 people about this podcast and send them a link to an episode you enjoyed, because direct word of mouth is huge for a little pod like mine. And now, let's get into it. Your girl has been feeling retrospective lately, and so we have a retrospective episode where I have gone through, with the help of a few listeners, and identified top 5 moments from the first 20 episodes, and we're going to go over those today. And I'm really excited to take a look back. This period of time has been interesting for me. So it is about 1 year and 2 days ago that I got laid off from my job in a big surprise rooney. And that was the impetus for me starting this podcast. I needed something to latch onto immediately that was going to be a thing because I had nothing in front of me at the moment. And so it was that and my mean therapist that we've talked about was the impetus that got this show on the road. And I'm proud of what I've done sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh, what is this thing? But that's just Linda Lame Sauce shouting in my ear. So it's been interesting to think about how far I've come in the past year, both in general and with this podcast. And I thought, what a beautiful time to take a look back and, looking at the past sometimes, not getting too wound up in it, right? But taking a look at progress and where you've been can help chart where you're going to go. And so if I've learned anything from doing this podcast, and it's been a lot, I've learned a lot, really. Um, it's that you have to grow. I was not apparently going to get it perfect right out of the gate, and this is a endeavor that gets better with time. And so this retrospective is going to be fun, I hope. Tell me, I guess. But it's also given me an opportunity to look at like what were the things I liked best and what did people like best and how can I have more of that in the future. Without further ado, we will jump right in. I did not rank these other than I put them in order and like, ooh, I think this would be nice for listening to it. So this is not like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the top one. These are just 5 moments that I am proud of or that people found the most entertaining to come out of my mouth. So the first one is drum roll, please. It was so convincing, right? Did you think I had drums in here? I didn't. That was my mouth. Okay. So so the first one is introducing the concept of I do mean to brag. So that was an entire episode we did. Episode 6 was Brag It Up, where I talked about the importance of bragging and have done the segment where I have bragged on people. And a listener told me that they have begun to use it shamelessly, this concept, to celebrate their own accomplishments. And that is truthfully a dream come true. The fact that I've been able to impact someone and they're able to brag on themselves more readily is like truly something worth getting out of bed for. But I don't want to just tell you about it because I've already told you about it. So I am going to cue up the clip and then you can hear me in my own words tell you why bragging is important. This week, we are going to talk about bragging because the practice of being excited about your accomplishments can get a bad rap. Singing your own praises, tooting your own horn, people who say, I don't mean to brag, but I'm here to set the record straight. Well, me and Brene Brown. Okay, not actually Brene Brown, author, speaker, professor, podcast host, but the words of Brene Brown. Maybe someday I'll have actual Brene Brown, but today it's just me talking about Brene Brown and her book, Atlas of the Heart. Yeah, I'm talking about a book already. We're like a minute in. And guess what? I'm not even going to tell you to read this book. Whoa, I know. But before you look for someone to bring you some pearls to clutch, let me explain. Calm down, take a breath. I'll do it in two. Okay, why am I not telling you to read this book? Well, if you have the resources, I think it's worth owning. But this book is more a manual than it is a book to read cover to cover. So, in Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown outlines 87 different emotions and experiences that you go to when you have those emotions in your mind and in your heart. So for each emotion, she gives a definition and explanation of what it looks like, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then she weaves in stuff about her own life. So, for example, and what I'm talking about today, in the section Places We Go to Self Assess, she covers pride, hubris, and humility. And pride is what we are talking about today. So, as defined by the talented, the wonderful, the amazing Brene Brown. Pride is a feeling of pleasure or celebration related to our accomplishments or effort. Now, when people are thinking of sort of the bad things, when they talk about bragging's bad, what you're really talking about there is hubris, right? So, hubris is inflating your sense of your own abilities. And that's tied more to wanting to dominate other people than it is to your actual accomplishments. So, no, we don't want to be overconfident. We don't want to be narcissist, but it is good to be proud of things that you have done. Pride has been positively associated with self esteem and negatively associated with shame. And who doesn't need more self esteem and less shame? I know I could use it, right? So that's why we're talking about it today. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not say the other thing that was great about bragging it up, which is my mouth air horn and uncovering that hidden talent. Blah, 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 blah. That was a good one. What was important to me about introducing that brag it up segment is that I have always been very passionate about recognizing people. In my personal life, I find it really important as often as possible to thank friends and family members for things big and small that they have done to help me in my day to day. And in my jobs, I carry around these notebooks, y'all. They're called knock knock notes. Once found at Books a Million, now found, I'm sure, on the internet. And they have all these little things. So, like, I have a pep talk notepad and a prescription notepad. And it's just like silly little notes that you can write to people. I carry those with me and take opportunities when I can, just because I think a kind word and showing somebody that they are seen and that you see them can make a big difference. And so I'm really proud that that is something that I've been able to accomplish with this podcast. And I look forward to in the future doing more bragging to include this episode's going to have a bragging segment. Get excited. So, God, I say so much. I say so much. Okay. The second highlight I am going to share today is me being very, very silly. Um, I do not often think before things come out of my mouth. There's a real quick turn from when it's in the head and when it's out of the mouth. So if you wonder, like, oh, you're funny, how do you do that? It's like, well, it's called taking chances, and sometimes it fails horribly wrong. But I just let sail what comes into the brain, and sometimes it works out. To include this moment, where for reasons again I can't tell you why, I sang a little bit of the jock jams. So this was back in episode 3, Wrestling the Winter Blues. And in this clip, I am explaining, to set it up a little bit, I'm explaining my no fail mood boosting trifecta. So there are 3 things that I think if you're in a mood, you try one of the 3 or all 3 if you're desperate, I guess, and it will make you feel better. So the 3 things are interact with a human, be it drop a text, see a person in person, whatever, get out of your head, talk to somebody else. Number 2 is do something with or for your body. So dance, go for a walk, stretch, stand up, anything. And then the third one, and this is where the jock jams comes in, is listen to music. And so I gave that advice and then just got real, kicking it back to the 90s. So I will cue up that clip. Please to enjoy. Number 2 is music. Put on music that you love. For me, what will always get me very excited, this is a very authentic moment, jock jams. Okay, this was the music that was blaring in stadiums in the 90s and 2000s. Like what's the one from that movie? I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. She likes to move it. That was a beautiful moment. I'm glad I recorded. Yep, that was me singing some jock jams. So you can tell, not a professional singer, but I subscribe to my girl Amy Poehler's quote, which is no one looks stupid when they're having fun. And so that is one of the tenets of my life is like, I try not to worry about it, but if I'm having a good time, then how I look is not important to me. It's not my business. You have to look at me. I'm not looking at me. We will now move in to number 3. And this is an entire episode that I wanted to highlight that I'm proud of, and it is episode 14, which was 6 tips to try to read more. And the reason this is important to me is obviously I love books, as it is a function of this podcast is talking about and recommending books. But this is the episode that the most people have told me, oh, this is the one I recommended to my friends, or I've gone back to listen to it, or I've, started incorporating some of the advice. And so it has seemed to resonate. And so the fact that I've been able to impact people to be able to read more is just like, so exciting. That was it should have been an excited noise. It sounded more terrifying, but trust me, I'm very excited. I'm not going to do a clip of this one because I wanted to say them again because part of this podcast, y'all, is also for me. I am learning and able to improve myself because sometimes I even take my own good advice, not a lot. What's happened to me the most actually is my friends who have listened to the podcast and then I complain about something and they're like, well, shouldn't you do X? Because in your podcast you said Y. And I'm like, wow, now I'm getting myself quoted at myself. Rude. But I want to repeat these tips because they could help me read more too. And by saying them again, I might internalize them a little better. So, number one thing to do if you want to read more is do other things less. That was my like, ugh, seriously, Ashley, bit of advice. But like, you have to anything you want to do in life, you might have to do other things less, things that you enjoy. You have to rework your priorities if something is important to you. So number 1, do other things less. Number 2, and this is the one people have said like, thank you for saying this, read more than one book at a time. Don't, pigeonhole yourself into something scary. If you don't love to read scary books all the time, get a scary one going, get a romance going, and then you can read based on mood. The number 3 thing, keep your book near you. Proximity matters. I should an addendum. Here's an edit of this. Keep your book near you. Keep your phone far away from you. Unless your book is on your phone, and then that's a battle you got to wage with yourself. Because I do not read on my phone. I don't think I would ever read. I would just be on the phone. The fourth one is that it is okay to quit. You do not have to finish every book you start. Life is short. If you're really not enjoying it, like don't worry about invisible book reports that you don't have to do. Just quit. It's okay. Fifth one, you've heard me say it many, many times. Audiobooks count as reading. It counts. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And then the last one was there is no time limit for how long it takes to finish a book. When I recorded this episode, I talked about how there was a book I started in August that I wasn't finished yet about economics. And guess what? I'm still reading it. So when will I be done? I'll let you know. The fourth moment I want to highlight from the first 20 is taking us all the way back to the very first episode. New year, same me, new podcast, which, I was so proud of that title. But the content I wanted to point out is that this captures a special je ne sais quoi, I do not know what, that people often compliment me on, just being a silly little weirdo. And I think of that as my gift to the world, in a sense. I am on this earth to be a bit of an entertainer and spread joy and spread smiles. And so this moment from the first episode is me actually talking about a moment when I was being like that with a tambourine, you may remember. But it was important to me that I did that in public and that I tied that moment to this podcast. And then I shared that moment on the very first episode of the podcast. So cozy up and listen to me talk about it now. But there is nothing I won't do to make sure others have a good time. In fact, and this is going to sound like a thing I orchestrated for this podcast I'm doing right now, but literally yesterday, I went to a brewery for my run club formal, like you do. And there was a live band, and they had several unattended tambourines. And I did my thing. A lot of tambourine work, a lot of circling around, like not your standard tambourine. Imagine what you think a person looks like playing the tambourine. That is not what I did. But the stranger in that brewery came up and said, "I love your energy." And then I said, "Great, I just launched a podcast." And then I got them to follow me. So if you're listening, thank you. You made my day. But to sum up, that is what I'm talking about when it comes to cheer. I'm talking about bringing energy. I'm talking about just bringing good vibes and making you feel good. So, what I mean by cheerleading is the act of supporting people with affirmation and empathy and that unflappable energy. So, cheering experience, check. Um, I'm available for tambourining, maracaing, whatever you got lying around. I played percussion in high school. I've played on a brake drum. I played cymbals. I played on a rain stick. Like, invite me to your family events, and I will be sure to delight you with some sort of shenanigans. And now we're going to get into our last topic. The fifth moment I wanted to highlight is from the episode called You're Rejected. Now What? And that was episode 9. And that is where I talked a bit about, as I talked about at the top of this episode, getting laid off from a job. And then more generally, I relayed that to just being rejected, be it by a friend or by a relationship, and sort of what that feels like and how we can move forward. And so this is one of, I think, the first times on the podcast that I shared something pretty personal, something that was negative, but something that I hoped would be relatable. So, the name of this podcast has the word cheer in it. And so my aim is to be positive and share positivity, but that doesn't always mean that everything's going to be happy. There are times when it is important, if not essential, to share things that are bad, and then we can learn from them and find the positivity or find a way ahead. And so in that advice, I believe I was able to it showcased what I defined as one of my strengths, which is the ability to sort of see things for what they are, and be open about struggles. I'm somebody like the day that I got laid off, I don't think I might have said this in the episode, but half of that day was me just texting and calling, I don't know, 20-ish people to let them know. And that's just part of my thing is like if I'm having a hard time, I'm going to share it and I'm going to be open about it. And I've done that a little bit on the podcast, but going back and listening to this episode, it felt surface level. I didn't really kind of dig into the feelings and the emotions of it. I sort of was like, and it was hard and then it was okay. And so that's something for me to think about as I develop future episodes. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But in general, I'm pretty proud about how I'm able to. I guess I'm bragging to myself. Wah, wah, wah. I'm able to sort of really see my feelings, and the advice I gave was about taking the time to feel and be rejected. You can't rush it. You kind of have to sit in it a little bit, but at a certain point, you have to decide and know it's time to move on and take action and begin that process. And so, I had people told me that that was helpful for them when it came to job stuff. Somebody said that it was helpful for them as they reflected on a romantic relationship. And so this episode kind of represents what I want to do more of in the future. And so we have announcement time. I said I had news about the future of the podcast. So I'm going to take a little bit of a summer break to have some fun, but also to really dig in, retool a little bit, and invest in myself, I guess, when it comes to how I want the next episodes to turn out. So I'm going to be taking 3 weeks off. So you will not hear from me again until July 30th. So I hope the rest of your July is awesome. And so what I'm looking to do in the future, I think I'll be keeping the format basically the same, where I want to give advice and I want to recommend books. Because the original intent of the show as I talk about on the front of the episode, is to improve your life. So I will continue giving life advice and recommending books that can relate to the advice. But there are some new things I'm going to try. So one of them is I'm going to try having a live studio audience. And by that, I mean having more guests. And it's still going to be a solo hosted show, but I think having somebody to vibe off of and sort of give the advice to in a conversation will be more impactful and allow me to get a little more vulnerable, which is the number two thing I want to try, is being more personal and more vulnerable, which when I thought about this ahead of time was great. Now that I'm saying it out loud to you, it is very scary because the more you open up, then it's out in the world and people can hear it and judge you on it and know about it. But I think that I'll be able to help more people by sharing a little bit more about myself. And, hopefully you will be down for that. And so we're going to give it a spin. I'm really excited about what the future holds. And I thank you for sticking with me thus far. And I look forward to chatting at you again later in July. And now we're not going to get out of this episode without some recommendations. But I thought, in keeping with the theme, I wanted to sort of recap my top three. Get excited. We are now moving into unrequired reading. And just to recap, sort of my intent with this segment is that I don't want to give you something else that you feel like you need to do. Like, oh gosh, I listen to this podcast. She recommends books. I'm behind on reading the books from her podcast. That is not the point. I love reading. And I think reading the right book or having the information from the right book can make a difference in your life. So, my point is to, and I think I've been successful about this sometimes, but I want to really be your Cliff Notes with a pulse. So, somebody who has already done the reading so that you don't have to and you can still learn something new. So, my vow to you is to keep doing that or do it even better in the days, weeks, months, years ahead. How long am I going to do this podcast? I have no idea. We're going to talk about my top three recommendations that I think I've given. And really, this was like, which were the ones I think I worded them the best or I was most excited about. And shocker, my top three has 4 books in it. You should know by now. I'm trying to make a list of favorites for me. Like I did a 5-episode thing and or 5 books, and there were 7 books on a list of 5. That's just how it is. So we're going to have 4 books, but really it's like 3. So the first one that I am most excited about recommending, and you should, consider reading if you've got the time and inclination, is The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure by William Goldman. And I talked about this book in episode 6, the Brag It Up episode, because I was trying to highlight characters who are comfortable bragging and being proud of themselves. And the fun thing was I gave myself homework this time around because I was like, well, I need to read it if I'm going to recommend it. And I had never read it. And it brought so much joy to me, both reading it and having read it. It warmed my heart. Tied together, I have always loved the movie, and getting to sort of investigate where it came from and really get a greater understanding. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, like researching William Goldman, and just like the respect I have for his creativity, the conceit he created, where it was the story within the story. It's just inspirational as someone who fancies themselves a bit of a storyteller. And I don't know that I would have read it were it not for this podcast and that suggestion, because it's been sitting there this whole time and I hadn't picked it up yet. The second book I'm going to talk about is also going to include the third book I'm going to talk about. So this is where I'm sneaking in another book into my list of 3 books that will actually have 4 books. We're kicking it back to episodes 4 and 5 of the podcast, which was about the brain. And the books I recommended were My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor and Whose Mind Is It Anyway? Get Out of Your Head and Into Your Life by Lisa and Franco Esile. Esile? Do you think that's Esile? Esile? I don't know. If you know, tell me. recommending those books and doing the episodes about the brain was very important to me. That's why it's so early in the podcast. I knew when I started this podcast that this was content I wanted to share because it really has changed my life and helped me in some ways find peace with myself. I There are things about myself that I don't like, and for a long time, I thought, nature versus nurture. And, I was born to be, anxious or, you know, quick to quick to anger, quick to react. I'm not quick to anger. I'm definitely going back to earlier talking about not a lot of time spent thinking before stuff comes out of my mouth. Doesn't always go great. You can imagine. And so, there were periods of my life where it was very frustrating. And it was like, well, that's just how you are. And reading Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor's book, My Stroke of Insight, and learning how she retaught her brain after having a stroke and how we can teach our brains to be different was a real game changer, truthfully. And the part in the book where she talks about, when you get angry, certain things are going to happen and you can't stop them because that's the pathways that you've created and the habits and routines. I was like, oh, I don't need to feel guilty about how I can't instantly, not be mad when something happens to make me mad because that's just the brain reacting. It's just like a sense of peace, like I said. And so I have spent time trying to distance myself from that negative stuff, that Linda Lame sauce, negative voice, and being able to equip people with these tools so that they can maybe find a little more peace was very important to me. And then combining that sort of dense personal memoir book with a cartoony sort of bathroom book about the brain, a really fun picture book, was great. I like being able to say, here are two resources. They are very different, but if you read one of them, that'll get you there. If you read both of them together, they give you a lot of insight. And that is what I have been excited to do with this podcast, is put different types of information in front of people, and hopefully something sticks. Something will resonate with you. And now we have the final of the top 3, except 4, but you get it. The final book that I'm most excited about recommending is not even a book that I recommended. What? Plot twist. So the book is Wellness by Nathan Hill. And that book was recommended on this podcast in episode 10, which was Cheerbrarian Presents Clifton Strengths Coach Heidi Convery Liscombe. So that was a book. I asked Heidi to recommend some books, and she recommended her own books that she has written and another book about strength finders. But the last one she recommended was one that she had recently finished reading, and it had really stuck with her. And, the way she talked about it was so exciting and so passionate that I quickly got it from my library. And that book consumed me, all 600 pages of it. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still recommending it. And that only happened to me because she was on this podcast. And that was just a great moment. Heidi was my first ever guest. So she, created the template, as it were, for what guesting on my podcast could be. And, thinking back, I was super nervous about if it would work because, especially in the beginning, I was being very scripted and very diligent in sort of thinking about podcasts. And when you work with another person, like I wasn't going to write her a script, obviously. So I didn't know what she was going to say or what I would say in response. And that required me to not have much control. And oh, do I love control? Control's great, truly. But not having control can also be great. And so I was like, if I can relax enough to be real, maybe it'll be okay. And it was such a blast. I remember us just sitting there talking and talking. We could have talked for like 2 more hours. It was so much fun, both making it and getting to share it with other people. Wellness by Nathan Hill is definitely worth your time. And I wanted to highlight the recommendation, not just because I wanted to mention the book again, because it's super good, because I did, but also because I wanted to recognize what it represents. Because this podcast is about me helping people learn and grow. That's my hope. But it's also about me pushing myself and being outside my comfort zone and what great things can happen when you do that and take that chance, such as learning about a book you hadn't heard of that you then read that really impacts you, and then you share it with other people. And so that is just representative of why this podcast is so important to me. And though there have been 20 episodes, I have recommended way more books than that because, we've had 3 books in an episode, 5 books in an episode. And if you're wondering, where can I figure out what all the books were? Well, on my website now, if you go to cheerbrarian.com, there is a page called Unrequired Reading, and I have listed out each recommended book by episode. So if you're looking for something to read or maybe a book to give to a friend, check it out. And now, it's been a minute since I have done this segment, but I could not do a reflection episode without doing a bragging segment, so join me. I do mean to brag because, as covered in the Brag It Up episode, it can be hard to brag on yourself, so I'm here to do it for you. And you know what time it is? You do. Pom, 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 pom. Pom, 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 pom. Will I ever get tired of doing that? We'll find out. I've been making that sound probably for a decade here and there. So signs point to no. Typically in this segment, I have a brag on 1 or 2 people. And it either is that someone has said, "Hey, could you brag about this for me?" And I say, "You betcha." Or it is that I have found a brag in the wild. So I've seen someone do something or seen them post about it on social media, and I say, "Hey, this thing you're doing is really cool. I'd like to brag about it." That is what is standard. But this is not a standard episode. This is the retrospective episode. So today, I'm going to brag on people who have supported me on this podcast journey. Those people who always respond to my text messages that come at all hours of the night asking, is this a dumb idea? No, Ashley, it's not. Is this too much? No, Ashley, it is not. That is what they have told me consistently and have been there to listen to early cuts of episodes and nurture my growth. And this is a bit of a list because it really takes a village to raise an Ashley. So, first up, we have Jennifer for always checking on me and never caring that as soon as you answer the phone, I launch into a very one sided monologue. I never ask, "Hey, are you busy?" I just start yapping. So, thank you to Jennifer. To Robin, Beckham, Vicky, and Sarah, who each have given me podcast themed swag. I just like getting those things in the mail or handed to me. Positively gobsmacked by those gestures really meant a lot. To my dad for commenting on each of my early episodes. This tough old bird really appreciated that. To Zoe and Lee for sticking with me all these years from when I was your college mentor to now, where you are supporting me both in this thing called life and in your exuberant support of my podcast. To the Buffy babes, Anna and Emily, for being consistent, there it is, consistent sources of humor and idea bouncing. And last and certainly not least, to Grant and Amelia for being my unpaid and uncredited, but very much appreciated producers. Note, I made this list and it gave me great anxiety because I'm sure that I've forgotten people who have said a kind word or who have helped me with ideas and been a source of support. So please forgive me if you feel that you should have been mentioned because you're probably right. And, vulnerability is sticky. And so that's what I want to bring more of in future episodes, moments like this. And so usually in this segment, I give a take on the brag. So my take on my own bragging on all those people, as I said, is it does truly take a village to raise a me. I'm a lot. And when I was typing up the names, when I made this list in my favorite local coffee shop, shout out to Vintage Cafe, I had tears in my eyes because I realized how absolutely lucky I am that I am just besotted with so many people who have shown that they believe in me and I'm getting teary now, and support this pursuit. And I really, truly couldn't have done these first 20 episodes without you and plan to do the rest of them still with you. None of you are off the hook. So thank you from the very bottom of my toes to the tippity top of my head. I appreciate you so, so much. So it is a bright spot in my day to brag on those people, and it would be a bright spot in my day to brag on you. Yes, specifically you. So I really want to bring this segment like to the forefront in future episodes, find some new ways to brag maybe. So if there is something that you are proud of, whether it's a big goal you've achieved or something small you've reconfigured, nothing is too small to get some cheerberry and love. So reach out to me if you want your own brag moment. You can DM me on Instagram or Facebook, or you can email me at cheerberryan@gmail.com. And now it is time for us to say ta-ta to episode 20. I love a little recap because life is busy and I want you to have something to take with you. So what the heck did we do today? In this episode, we looked back at 5 top moments of this podcast, and I talked about what the future holds, including having more guests in my studio audience, as well as taking a break to retool. So I'll be back with new episodes on the 30th of July. I'll miss you. In unrequired reading, I recommended 4 of my favorite books that have been recommended so far on the pod. The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure by William Goldman. My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor and Whose Mind Is It Anyway by Lisa and Franco Isaio, and Wellness by Nathan Hill, which was recommended from my first guest, Heidi. And please follow and review wherever you pod, and join the Cheerberry on Instagram or Facebook by following me at the @Cheerberryan handle. That's where you can see resource links and other goodies, and talk to me, which I would love. Now go on, get out of here. Take a real break. Drink more water. Okay, bye!